Welcome to Building Birding Skills. We did a sort of a last minute practice version of this a couple months ago, but this is it's a little bit different than the talk I gave a while back with almost no notice. What the main body of what I'll be talking about today is 3 basic broad clues to bird identification, but I'm also going to go into a couple other techniques for improving your bird identification skills. And I did want to emphasize at first that it's not about trying to identify every bird you see, because that's not possible and could be frustrating. And it's just, that's not, you know, if you can't identify every bird you see, then you're probably looking at birds that are too far away. And I'll talk more about that also. And that's good, that's good. And as Tim mentioned, he posted links to some books, and I may or may not mention the names of all of those today, but those are all really useful resources. Next slide. Okay, when I did this talk the first time, I had the clues listed in this order. And these, basically, there are 3 things to think about when you're trying to identify a bird. It's in general, the bird's behavior, including the sounds it makes, that's a behavior. Its appearance, what does it look like? And, you know, that includes size and shape and colors and patterns and things like that. And then its distribution, and the distribution is in time and place. So in place, it would be the bird's range and its habitat and its microhabitat. And in time, it's the time of year that you're seeing the bird, or maybe the time of day a little bit too. And this is the way I presented the clues the first time, but really, whenever you see a bird, even if you're not thinking about this, just about everybody automatically discounts of the 11,000 kinds of birds in the world. You're discounting, you know, almost 11,000 kinds, almost all except for 100 or 200 kinds of birds that could be where you are at one place in time. And then the more you know about bird distribution, the more you can narrow down the possibilities of what you might be seeing. So depending on your location and the time of year and things like that. So the more I thought about it, really distribution should be the first clues. And the more I looked at this list, I realized this is a bad acronym for trying to remember the clues to bird ID. So anyway, I switched them around, and this is the new acronym. The other thing I want to mention here is there's a temptation often when you think about one clue that we'll be talking about later. It's, you know, the crest or beak or this color or pattern or behavior, that there's a temptation to want to put the name on the bird quickly, but you have to think of a couple things. One is the clue you're using, or the combination. It should always be a combination of clues. Are those clues definitive? Are those the clues that you need to identify the bird? Or if it has a crest, like you see a bird in your yard with a crest, is it a blue jay? Well, maybe it's a cardinal, maybe it's a titmouse. So think about, are you using all the correct clues to identify the bird? And it seems obvious, but there is this sort of temptation to just latch on to the first 1 or 2 things you see and try to name the bird as quickly as possible. The other thing is, it's very important to think about, did you really see those things? If you think a bird had a yellow belly, did it really have a yellow belly, or was that a reflection of the light? If you think a bird didn't have a crest, could its crest have been laying down? Maybe it did have a crest. Or, you know, so think about, are you using the right clues, and did you really see those clues? All right, so here's one trick. I call this expanding your ROO, your radius of observation. And a lot of times when we're looking at birds, the easy, simple, kind of the obvious thing is just to look at the birds that are fairly close, because you can see them better and see a lot more details. You know, a pretty bird up close looks a lot prettier than a pretty bird a mile away. But if you want to improve your identification skills, it really helps a lot to look at birds that are far away. And this 50M to the infinity, that's just a study where they looked at point counts where people would just count birds that were 50 meters away, which it's kind of it seems like it's a close distance, but actually that's where you're seeing most people are seeing most birds, I think. But if you start looking far away, you basically approximately double the number of birds that you see. So when you're outside, you may be in your yard and you're looking at the bird in the closer bushes or the the feeders or something, but don't forget to scan the sky, scan the farthest trees, keep looking around. So not only do you see a lot more birds, but it also pushes you to the limit, because the farther away they are, the harder they are to identify. So what is a picture of a piano doing in a bird identification talk? Well, if you wanted to learn how to play the piano, you would expect that you would make some mistakes. Nobody would expect to learn the piano, just sit down and start correctly playing the piano. And if anyone said, well, I want to learn the piano, but I don't want to touch it because I don't want to make any mistakes because that would look bad. People would think you're crazy. Same with a lot of things. Imagine trying to play basketball. Don't give me the basketball. I might drop it, or if I don't want to shoot because I might miss, and that would look bad. For learning how to do any kind of a skill, you have to expect that you will fail, and the more beginner you are, the more often you'll probably fail. But even people who have been playing piano for a long time still make mistakes. And obviously, as anyone who's watched any sports knows, a basketball player doesn't make every single shot. But for some reason in the birding community, there seems to be this pressure or reluctance to misidentify things or to try to identify things when you're not 100% sure. So you want to, if you see a bird and you don't know what it is, the way the brain works is it's better to try to identify it. And then if you're wrong, figure out what you got wrong than to just say, oh, I don't know what that is. I can't tell. That doesn't really help you at all. But if you start thinking, well, okay, we're in Florida. I can narrow down my possibilities of this. It's a little songbird. It's narrowed down to this. It's got a crest. Oh boy, that's only a couple of things now. It's either, I can't tell how big it is and it's backlit. It's kind of far away. Maybe it's a cardinal or a titmouse or something. You're narrowing down your choices as you look at more and more details. And that's sort of a general theme that I want to talk about today in a general approach to birding that's very useful. And this quote from Michael O'Brien, there's different, he's a bird identification expert. He wrote the Shorebird Guide and lots of other articles about bird identification. If you aren't misidentifying things, you're not trying hard enough. If you, there's this quote that it's in different variations where it says the only difference between a beginning birder and an advanced birder or a bird identification expert is the expert has misidentified a lot more birds. And if you think about it, that's mostly true. The key thing about that though is if you misidentify something, you have to use that as a learning experience. It's the same with basketball or playing piano. If you're playing a piece in piano and you miss a key, you don't just finish the whole thing and forget about it. You try to play that section again until you get it right. If you're trying to do a shot in basketball and you miss it and you're learning, how to do a certain shot, you don't pretend that didn't happen. You go back and you try to make that shot again and again and again until you get it down. It's the same with birds. If you misidentify something, you don't make an excuse, well, I didn't see it, or it was too far, or whatever. You figure out, well, what was it? If someone else could identify it, but I couldn't, what was it that they were seeing or that they knew that I didn't know? So that mentality is for getting good at birds or getting good at doing anything really is really important. And I'll specifically be talking about that in relation to birds. And so this quote by Michael O'Brien, there's also this whole concept, there's a famous philosopher who mentions this in a movie some of you may have seen. This is from Empire Strikes Back. The greatest teacher failure is. This is when Luke Skywalker doesn't want to try when he's trying to become a Jedi. So this is this proves that this is actually a good concept, I think. And if this is too hard to remember still, there's an even simpler little way to remember it. It's just failure is fertilizer. So if you're feeling bad about having done something wrong, don't think about it as, oh man, I screwed up. I look so bad. This is horrible. Think of it as, hey, here's a great learning opportunity. I misidentified this bird. I'm going to figure out why I misidentified it, and I'm going to learn it. And next time, I'm going to do better. So getting into the clues. The first clue is distribution. And there's a map and a calendar. So that's to show its distribution in place and in time. And I'll just go into detail in the subsequent slides. So there are three parts. I mentioned this briefly earlier. There's the range that's on the map. There's habitat. What kind of areas would you find the bird in within that range? And then the seasonality, is a bird in a certain area only a certain time of year or all year round? So range is the first thing you want to look at to narrow down your options. And this is why field guides with range maps are so useful, because with the range map next to the picture of the bird, if the field guide is a range map in the back, you could be looking at a bunch of different birds, and first thing you think is, geez, are all of these here, or are only some of these here? So field guide should have at least three colors: summer, where the bird is only in the summer, where the bird is only in the winter, and here it's blue in Florida, and then when the bird is year round, which is purple here. And then some field guides have other things, like where a bird's more common, the colors are darker, or during migration. This is for this map of a chipping sparrow, that's shown in yellow. And this All About Birds website is run by Cornell. That's a great website for real quick, reliable information about birds, because we all know that nowadays you can Google anything and 90% of it is often junk, but that is one good website. So you first want to make sure that the bird you're looking at is supposed to be, that you're in the range of the bird. And of course, there are vagrant birds. They can fly, they show up in weird places, but 99.999% of the time, it's going to be something that's supposed to be there. All right. The next clue, next part of the distribution clue is habitat, and there's a few parts to habitat. All right, this is a loggerhead shrike, and just kind of curious to test the chat function here. Tim, could you, if you're watching this and you know how to use chat, which barely includes me, I think still, where would you expect to see a shrike? What kind of habitat would you find a shrike in? Type that in the chat, and let me see if Tim can read the first answer. Go ahead, Daryl. I can see you. You're the only person I can see.
Lisa said around an open field, or no,
exactly. Yeah. Oh, great. Yes, an open field. Perfect. Yes. So, would you ever expect to see a chat in thick wood? Sorry, it's not chats. There are birds called chats. Would you expect to see a shrike in thick woods? No. Okay, you wouldn't see it flying out over the beach either. You wouldn't see it swimming in the lake. So in an open field, also very open woods sometimes work like open fields for some birds. But yeah, we live I live a few blocks from a school with open fields, and we have never seen or heard a shrike in our yard. We're just that far away. And they're more strict about those habitat requirements than even bluebirds that will fly around more searching for other open areas. But we have never seen a shrike in our yard despite being so close to a school. So that's a example of how habitat is useful. If you're in thick woods and someone says, oh, there's a shrike up in that tree with those warblers or something, I'm getting into behavior there too. But look at in the canopy of this thick tree and some really thick woods, I think that's a shrike. It probably isn't. So the range part of this also works for shrikes. There are shrikes in Florida. There's only one kind of shrike. So if you're in a field and you see a shrike, you know it's a loggerhead shrike. If you go to Africa, there are tons of different kinds of shrikes, and it can get kind of tricky there. So then you can narrow down habitat and think about, so woodpeckers peck on wood usually, although there's some that don't. But so you would think they're around trees, but more specifically, red-headed woodpeckers, what kind of a microhabitat would you find them in? They're not in all kinds of woods. Is there anything specific associated with the habitat of red-headed woodpecker? This is a lot harder question than the shrike question. Anyone want to guess what kinds of areas? This photo is a bit of a clue where you find red-headed woodpeckers. More specific than pine woods, which you can see there's pines here and they are in pine woods. But is anyone typing there, Tim?
Let's see. Maryland says snags.
Snags, yes. So that's one of the reasons red-headed woodpeckers are declining, is a lot of places are removing snags. And if you're looking for red-headed woodpeckers, you don't go to a woods that doesn't have any snags or big dead branches. You're unlikely to find them. But if you haven't seen a red-headed woodpecker, which is not that unusual because they are declining, if you find a bit of nice open woods, so more open woods also, with a bunch of dead trees, big snags, not just little ones, but that branch and even bigger, like the size of these birds and bigger branches, that's where you find red-headed woodpeckers. So that's a good clue for keying into that habitat. And another woodpecker clue where you can sometimes guess a bird without knowing anything about the size or shape or colors or patterns or anything, just on the behavior. And this is how sometimes people that have been birding for a while and are tuned into the stuff can guess birds pretty quickly before you've even started to explain them. If someone says, yeah, there was this bird and we have this dead log and it was on the log, what would your first guess be? You had a dead log on the ground and you saw this bird on the log without me giving any clue about what the bird looked like. Anyone want to try to guess that? In Florida, not a rough grouse drumming a log. Somebody made a guess. Let me see. Something flashes on my screen. Can you see it? Did something come in, Tim?
Let's see. No woodpecker guesses yet.
Okay. So what was the non-woodpecker guess? I want to hear it.
One guess was wood duck. Another was Carolina wren.
Okay.
Here's one. Sonny guessed flicker.
Flicker is good.
Maryland guessed pileated.
Pileated. That's what I'm thinking. So right there could be. You could have a flicker here if there were ants or something like that. And of course you could have a Carolina wren or a winter wren or something like that. But if there's a big bird, if there's a bird really working on this log, and so you're adding in some behavior, pecking or spending some time there, but you can a pretty good guess that you're it could be a pileated woodpecker. And the reason I had this is if somebody who doesn't know anything about birds talks about a bird on their log, then it's probably a pileated, because a flicker, somebody might not really notice that as much, but pileateds are very noticeable. But anyway, just some examples of some clues, how to take it to range, narrow it down to habitat, and then microhabitat, and even something very, very specific like that. And when you're in your yard, then it's useful to think about, what happens is you'll see a cardinal or a chickadee or something. You think, okay, I know what that is. That's okay. Let's look for something else maybe, or it's doing some neat behavior. But a useful thing to think about anytime is also look at what kind of habitat is the bird using. So is it on the ground? Is it in a tree? If it's in a tree, is it at the end of the branch? Is it closer to the trunk? Is it in a tangle of vines? Is it in dead leaves? Those are the kinds of details that they're fun to look for, and it's also helpful. You learn a lot about birds that way. So the last clue for distribution is seasonality. And if you go to eBird, and Tim, did you post this also somehow in the eBird bar chart?
Yes, I posted it to our Facebook page, and I'll grab the same link from there and post it into the chat box.
Okay. So there's a website called eBird it's run by Cornell, and it's super useful for all kinds of things relating to finding birds. And you could also take bird identification quizzes on it and things like that. Be prepared to be humbled because they throw some hard ones in there. But basically you go to eBird, which is the website, the Explore tab, and the bar charts, and then you choose your location. That's all the specific directions on how to do that are on the PDF I showed, Tim shared. But this is kind of what it looks like here. And this is just a clip from a bar chart I made for my own yard. And you can see that Eastern Phoebe, the bird on the top, is seen in my yard January, February, March, and we have never seen a Phoebe in our yard in April. And then all of a sudden they show up in October, but we've never seen them in September. On the other hand, in mid-March, gray-crested flycatchers start to show up. There's a few of them, and then you get more, and then they're common all throughout the year. And they get a little bit quiet in late August when they have young, I think, and then they just slowly fade out by September. So these bar charts are super useful to figure out what birds you might likely be seeing. And what I like to do if I'm going to go somewhere is I will make a bar chart. You have to use Firefox as your browser. It doesn't work in Google Chrome, I think, but you print up, or you go to the bar chart in eBird, and then you can print it, and you print with images, which sometimes takes a little fiddling around. Then you can save that as a PDF, and that's sort of like your study guide. Say you've never been to California and you're going to spend a week in the Los Angeles area. You just go to LA County, print up your eBird bar chart, and use that. And you know, say this bar chart were not for my yard, but it were for LA County, and you saw some kind of flycatcher and it was June. Well, you'd be pretty sure it wasn't a great crested. Sorry, it wasn't a Phoebe, but it could have been a great crested. So there are more ways you can mess around with those numbers. You can also, if you want to download those the eBird bar charts, you can download the data from there, and then you can, it's super simple. It just takes a few steps, but then you can look at, oh, I'm going to be in this one place during these 2 weeks. What are the most common birds? Because if you go somewhere where there are tons of birders, you'll have a list of a few hundred birds, and you really say you're going to a new country and you just want to know the top 10 birds or the top 100 birds out of the 700 birds that are in this area you're going to be. So you can download the list and you put it in an Excel sheet, and then you can rank it. So this is for our yard in August. We've seen cardinals on 98% of the complete list that we've seen. This is really just an index, the percentage of list, but it gives you a very good idea of how likely you are to see these different birds. So just highly recommend playing around with the eBird bar charts a little bit. All right, the next clue is behavior. All right, you've got a bird flying around in the sky. It's holding its wings in a little bit of a V. It's tilting back and forth. Someone want to guess that in the chat box? Did anybody type it in?
Marilyn, guess vulture?
Yep, it's a vulture, and there are two kinds of vultures in Florida. There are black vultures and turkey vultures. The black vultures hold their wings flat and they don't tilt back and forth as much. So that would be the turkey vulture that is I'm showing you here. And you can kind of see it's tilted a little bit, although it's hard to tell a lot of things in a photo. Also, you can see the wings are in a little bit of a V though. And now the human mind, just like we want to look at things that are closer, and for some reason we don't mind making mistakes when we do sports as much as when we look at birds. Anyway, there's weird things that happen with human nature that I don't quite understand, but we're definitely tempted to look at colors more than anything. And colors are actually the worst clue of all for bird identification. Behavior, it seems very subtle and maybe a little bit tricky at first, but a bird's behavior really is one of the first things you want to think about. Then you kind of get into the bird's appearance, and that's the next clue I'll talk about. But behavior is very, very important. There are a lot of, just like there are microhabitats, there are micro behaviors, and I'll be talking about some more of those. So you have a little bird, it comes to your bird feeder, grabs a seed or a peanut and takes it out and starts pecking on it on a stick. And there's basically two choices for that. Anyone want to guess what those two? You can just say the general name, because it doesn't matter where you are in the United States. There's two kinds of birds that are likely to do that. All right, Tim, what do we got?
Sunny says titmouse and chickadee. That's
it, exactly, right. So even if you couldn't see this bird very well, if it was a long ways away or the light was bad, or if you saw that behavior, you'd know that's what it was. And I'm making some of this up to sound like the ultimate goal is to just put a name on the bird. And that's great. It's important because once you put a name on it, you can learn more about the bird. But watching all these behaviors is just fascinating. So it's very rewarding, and it helps you learn more about them. So the first behavior, though, that I want to go into detail with a little bit is sound. And then I've got all other behaviors lumped as the other behavior clue. But sound is really the most important clue of all for birds in general. And this one study found in suburban landscapes that 70% of bird observations or you could observe it auditorially. So maybe I could have said detections, but 70% are auditory. And we notice that in our yard. We sit out there and it's just, you hear the sounds, and sure, you can see some things, but by the time you've seen 3 cardinals, you've probably heard several of them. It takes, for some reason, this is more intimidating, where humans are just more visual, I think, animals than auditory. But it's just like watching any other kind of behavior. It's very rewarding. It can be very tricky too, and I'll talk a little bit about that in a minute. But I think one of the best ways to learn sound is to try to track sounds down. So you hear a sound, you don't know what it is. Try to see what's making it, and then watch the bird as it makes that sound. Another thing that is useful is if you try to imitate the sound yourself. And then you can try to describe the sound. And there are some great books out there that talk about bird sounds. Donald Kroodsma, that's one of the books that Tim sent out. He has 3 books about bird sound, and they're all amazing. And they go into a lot of detail into basically how to listen to birds, and some of them are more travel writing, some of them are more technical, and how do you analyze these sounds, but they're all excellent books. He's a very enthusiastic and good writer, so I'd recommend any of the Kroodsma books. The other thing that just came out in the last few years, which is really nice, and it's kind of amazing this didn't come out earlier, is a field guide to bird sounds by Nathan Piplow. And I think the Western guide just came out in the last year or so, and then he's had this Eastern guide out for a few years. But that looks at birds as though it's the bird sounds, and you're not looking at the bird at all, you're looking at the sounds. He's got sonograms or visual depictions of the sounds the birds make, and there are links so you can go online and listen to all these sounds. And that's a super useful book. It has a lot more, a normal field guide can't devote that much space to describing all the different or many different sounds birds make. So highly recommend paying more attention to bird sounds. So there's some obvious ways sound can be interesting. For example, for distinguishing the 2 crows. Now there are physical things or appearance related clues that can distinguish them. For example, the fish crow, when it calls, it usually fluffs its neck feathers out, whereas the American crow, as far as I've seen, never, or maybe almost never does that. So you can tell which one of these 2 is the fish crow then. It's the one on the left because it has neck feathers puffed out. The American crow also has these kind of a scaly pattern on its back that the fish crow doesn't have. It usually has a bigger bill. Fish crow has a longer tail, things like that, a little smaller. But a lot of those are very subtle. And the obvious way is to tell them apart is you listen to them. And the joke with that is you ask the crow, are you an American crow? And if it says, then it's a fish crow. It's a more nasal sound, like, but it's also usually doubled. But crows can make all kinds of different noises. They're super fun to listen to. And every once in a while, especially if it's a younger American crow or something you don't hear very well, they definitely can trip you up a little bit. All right, here's state bird of Florida, unfortunately. Not that I don't like mockingbirds, but it should be the Florida scrub jay. And they're called mockingbirds because they imitate other birds. And you might think, well, if it's imitating another bird, how do you know that it's a mockingbird and not the bird that it's imitating? And that can happen, and it's got me more than once. But what the mockingbird does is it will imitate another bird in a group of 3 or 4, and then it'll switch and do a different bird or a different sound. It's not all of its sounds are imitation, just some of its sounds. So it might say, and that pattern is distinctive in Florida, at least for the northern mockingbird. We have brown thrashers that breed in Florida, and they imitate also, but they only usually just do it twice, and it's more emphatic. So, and then in the winter, we have gray catbirds, and they're in the same family, which a good hint is the bird structure. So they're medium-sized songbirds with long tail. The bills look similar. And catbirds are also mimics, but they don't do it in such a 2 or 3 or 4 pattern. They kind of do more of a jumble of notes. And you may hear them singing in the spring in Florida, but probably not in the winter. There are also lots of birds that aren't famous for being, or are not sometimes thought of as mimics, but that do a lot of mimicry. This is a white-eyed vireo, and they often start their song with a note that's imitated from another bird. They may end with an imitated note also. And sometimes, and they're really good. So sometimes if they're sort of far away and the first note is pretty emphatic. So you may just hear that first note and you think, oh, it's a great crested flycatcher. But then you think, well, something seemed a little off, and why is it so low or something? And you get closer and then you realize, oh, all right, that was a white-eyed vireo that fooled me again. And there lots of birds can do bits of mimicry. Some of them do it a lot, like as part of their normal songs, and others just do it every once in a while. Even birds like towhees can do mimicry sometimes. And then this is a baby Carolina wren. You can tell because of the paler below. The underparts are paler, not as orangey as an adult. It's a little bit of his baby lips, the fleshy gape, and also has a baby rattle. So it's a juvenile Carolina wren. And in the spring, or not spring, sorry, the late summer, could be spring in some places in Florida, more in the summer, late summer, whenever there are baby birds around, they have to learn how to sing sometime. And when they start singing, it's just like a baby learning to talk. And so it doesn't sound like an adult song. Sometimes it sounds so different that it's really hard to figure out what it is. But usually if you listen to a really weird sound and that sounds like a song, but it just sounds strange and it's in the summer, if you listen for a while, pretty soon the little guy will figure out, get a few notes that make a little more sense, and you'll probably be able to figure out what it is. But that's just something to think about when you're listening to bird song in the middle of the year. The other thing that in the summer, the other thing that happens though is when migrants come through, sometimes in the fall, they'll sing a few bits of a song just for the heck of it. And then in the spring, a lot more migrant birds will be singing. And since they haven't been singing much or at all winter long, they kind of have to warm up again. So you'll get these songs that sound a little bit weird as these birds are coming through Florida sometimes. All right, the other clue then is other behaviors. And so anything a bird does is a behavior just like anything a person does. We're all probably sitting down, all probably looking at a screen, and I'm the only one talking, hopefully, but you're on mute, so it doesn't really matter. So anyway, however a bird moves, however a bird sits, however a bird gets its food, however it rests, all those things are behaviors. And just like with habitat, you can look at microhabitat, you can look at micro behaviors. Here are 3 birds, Anhinga on the left, a common gallinule in the middle, and a piebald grebe on the right. They're all swimming, but they're all swimming a little bit differently. Piebald grebe will sink down into the water really slowly, but when it comes up, its whole body, its whole back is out of the water, although it can sometimes swim with just its head up, but it doesn't do that much. It's usually like secret mode when it's doing that. The Anhinga, on the other hand, is frequently seen with just its head and neck out of the water. That's how it gets the name snakebird. And then common gallinule, they never go under the water. I mean, they can if there's an eagle swooping down at them, but they're very buoyant. They'll pop right up. It's hard for them to go underwater. The other thing they do that the other 2 birds don't do as they're swimming is they'll peck at vegetation on the top of the surface of the water, and you wouldn't see a grebe or an Anhinga doing that. So just to say the bird was swimming, that's good. That narrows down your list of your however many birds you've got at that time and place. You've narrowed it down to just a handful of species maybe, unless it's winter in Florida and there's a bunch of ducks or something. But if it's summer in Florida and you've got a swimming bird, there aren't all that many options. But then you want to kind of look at the micro behaviors. How was it swimming? What was it doing when it was swimming? And so some of these things, this is a chimney swift, and some of these behaviors are sort of subtle. And if you don't think about them and try to look at the behavior and analyze how the bird is moving, for example, when it's flying, it might not really sink in. But if you're watching a chimney swift and you spend some time, and they're pretty easy to identify if you get a good look at them. And then the temptation again is like, oh, I've identified that because of the sad thing about a lot of birding is that once you've identified a bird, the time you're spent looking at it, you're not looking at any other birds. And so if you're looking at, unless something flies by. So the temptation of a lot of birders is put your binoculars up, got the idea of that, then start looking for the next bird. But what you really want to do is take some time to appreciate the bird's behaviors or details of its appearance. And so with chimney swifts, if you watch them and try to describe the behavior and look at how they're moving, you can find they do all kinds of really interesting display flights and things like that. But even just the basic flight, the way they fly with these stiff wing beats, that's very distinctive. And you can see that kind of chimney swift flight as far away as you can see the bird, and they're tiny. So it's just a speck in the sky, but this erratic flight with stiff wing beats is distinctive for a chimney swift and different than a swallow. And to emphasize this, I showed I was doing a talk about bird once, and I asked the audience if anyone could describe a bird behavior. And this little tiny girl said, well, like a chimney swift, for example, you can always tell it's a chimney swift and not a swallow when you look at it and you see it flying, because the chimney swift fly like crazy and the swallows fly different. And I looked at her and she was really tiny. I said, how old are you? She said 2. So even if she only started birding at 1, she was probably only birding for a year then. And she was very young. But I think these are things that we can pick up on because it's sort of human nature to be able to understand the natural environment. Unfortunately, we're just so removed from it these days. We don't pay attention, and the way we interact with the natural environment is different than it was even 100 years ago. But anyway, just an encouragement to watch the way chimney swifts fly, and not just when it's close and you have a good look, but watch them as they're flying away. See when it's a little speck in the sky, can you still tell that's a chimney swift? And if you spend a little bit of time watching, a lot of those things you can actually pick up pretty quickly. So these are black-bellied whistling ducks, and the way birds fly, not just the speed of the wing beats or the direction they fly, but also the flocking style can be very helpful. And so any bird that is in a flock, you could also probably see it individually, but there's a lot of individual birds like hummingbirds that you don't really see flying around in flocks. Hummingbird, a little tiny thing, just zooms right by you in a straight line, maybe. Okay, that's, you wouldn't see a flock of ducks do that. But even within something like ducks, you can look at types of flocking behavior. For example, the black-bellied whistling ducks have these sort of messy groups where they shift place. It looks like they don't really know where they're going or who the leader is, whereas you see some other groups of ducks and they keep their formation better. You know, even something like Canada geese, when they're flying, those things, they're the clear leader. As they're going to roost at dusk, you'll see the lines, and it's still compared to something like a skein of geese. The flocks of whistling ducks are sloppier. They're also very vocal when they're flying around at dusk. So that's another good clue to their identification. But when you're looking at a bird flying, look at what's the flock formation, how spaced are the birds, do they move around in the flock? When they fly, do they stay on a level line? Do they kind of bounce up and down as an undulating flight? How high up and down do they bring their wings? Things like that. Then there's a difference between soaring and gliding. Soaring is the bird on the left is soaring, and that's trying to get maximum lift. This bald eagle has its wings spread out all the way and its tail spread pretty wide. And they're trying to catch a thermal or some uplift of air and rise up. Gliding, on the other hand, the bird pulls its wings in, pulls its tail in, and that's going to get from one place to another. And understanding how those two flight styles and something like a steep glide is a stoop. That's even wings pulled in a lot tighter and tail pulled in tighter. But understanding how those flight styles, if it's gliding or soaring, affect the shape of a bird can give you a clue, like a bird that normally has a forked tail, if it's if it's soaring and it's got its tail all spread out, it doesn't look as forked, for example. So things like that. And if you watch a bird flying around for a while, you often see it flying in different flight styles and see how that the shapes change. So another thing then that's visible at a good distance is the way birds hold their head out. Tall, long-necked birds. And our daids, members of the heron and egret and bittern, et cetera, family, when they fly, they hold their necks back like this great blue heron. He doesn't hold his neck straight out. Yeah, they can stretch them out when they fly, and every once in a while, especially it seems like little blue herons more than anything, will keep their necks stretched out a little bit when they fly. But most of the time, if you're seeing in our daiad, heron or egret, even if it doesn't have a long neck, comparatively speaking, for in our daiad, it still holds the neck back like this. On the other hand, storks, for example, they always fly with their neck out and they never pull it back in when they fly. Can anyone tell me the name of another long-legged and long-necked wading bird in Florida that always keeps its neck stretched out straight when it flies? Let's see in the chat. There are a few of them. I can think of two that are common. Okay. Go ahead, Tim. What do we got? I guess I maybe can see it here too, but I just don't want to. Crane, yes. All right, yes, sandhill cranes. All right. And John, roseate spoonbill, also excellent, excellent. That's all the people that wrote in? There's more, there's smaller ones. Sandhill crane is sort of the most obvious one. What's one that's a little bit smaller that always flies with, but still long-legged and long-necked, that always flies with its neck stretched out? Ah, limpkin, yep. How about the same general shape of a limpkin, but not brown with white speckles?
There we go. Steve said it. Ibis.
Okay. White ibis. Yep. A few people, white ibis. And don't forget flamingos. So anyway, all right. So this is obviously, this is visible at a real long distance. Okay. All right. So which one of these two birds is the Ardeiad? You can't, you could tell what these are. It's a little bit tricky, but what so you can tell what they are based on this picture, but it's a little trickier, but it's easy to tell which one of these things is an Ardeiad, egret or heron, because the neck is only pulled back on one of them. This little bit difference here, this is a sandhill crane, a little bit of a weird flight. In this, okay, so this is an egret or heron or bittern, you could say. And look how short this bill is. We're not getting into structure yet, but proportionally, this is a small bill for egret or heron. Anyone want to guess what that one is?
Cattle egret.
Cattle egret, good. All right, someone got it. Yeah, that's, so once you think, okay, we know how they fly, then you can start that it becomes instinctual, and you can start to key into other things like the bill proportions or how far out the legs go or something like that. All right, so another behavior is feeding. And you've got a tall gray bird in the field and it's sticking its bill into the ground and probing around. Well, that's definitely not a great blue heron. They don't do that. I mean, it might look like that if it was trying to grab a hold of a fish for a second, but sandhill cranes will really probe around down in the mud. That's a distinctive feeding behavior for a crane if you're comparing it with a great blue heron. Another thing is just how they associate. If you see two big gray birds out in the field, it's probably sandhill cranes. When was the last time you ever saw two great blue herons not at a nest standing next to each other? They're pretty aggressive. They don't usually do that. So that's a couple things about sandhill cranes, the way they forage, and that they're often, especially it's the Florida sandhill cranes, in two or a bunch of them. Okay, finally, the appearance. This is usually first clue people go to, but it's really maybe one of the last things you think about in a lot of ways. So there's a few components to this, and you could break this up any way you want. I just like to kind of split them up this way. The structure is the first thing that I think is most important, and that's the the shapes of a bird, and then the size. And size is sort of in some ways the best and the worst clue. Size is super easy to misjudge, and I still do it all the time, even when I know I'm trying not to, just because of things like lighting. And it's not, I mean, people can identify a tiny bird for actually a medium-sized bird, or a medium-sized bird for a very large bird. You won't identify a hummingbird for an eagle, but you might identify a small hawk for an eagle. And that seems dramatic, and you might think, oh, that never happens, but it actually does. But structure is things like the length of the legs or the neck or things like that. And then I have bill broken out into a separate clue, because this is so important. The bills or beaks, it's the same thing, are sort of the key to what group a bird fits into. And if you can get the size and shape and things like that, but you want to narrow it down to beak. And even within a group, like say purple finch or Cassin's finch or purple finch, Cassin's finch, and house finch, they all have subtle differences in their bills. And those are things that if you just think, well, it's got a seed-eating bill and you don't pay that much more attention to it, then you miss out on some subtle details. And then patterns and colors. And notice the very last clue in this whole thing is colors. That's because colors are the most easily mistaken of all these clues, and very variable. So I'll talk about those last. So here's a couple silhouettes of birds that were sitting on our roof. I guess for the sake of time, I'm not going to just do too much chatting, but you just try to guess what they are. You can't see the bottom one. All you can see is the front half of it. You can see its bill there. And the top one, you can see the whole bird. We know we've got a few birds with crests that come to yards: cardinals, chickadees, and titmice. Blue jay's bill is really different. So it's either a titmouse or a cardinal. A little bit of subtle differences in the head shape and the crest and the thicker bill. So that's a cardinal. And then here's a bird. We don't know how big it is because we don't have anything for comparison really, but long, it's compared to the size of the head. When you're talking about things like bill length, you want to compare it to something. So the length of this bird's bill is about halfway or less the size of its head. If you can see the bird, you can see its eye. That's another good thing to use for comparison. The base of the bill to the tip compared to the base to the eye, or something like that. Thin bill like that of birds in your yard, they're really only going to be Carolina wren, probably. At least that would perch up on your roof. You might see a house wren in the winter in your yard, depending on where you live. Bills is slightly different for that. So most birds can be identified just based on their silhouette. And I know it's not nearly as fun to look at a cardinal if you can't see the bright red, but if you pay attention to a cardinal when it's only in silhouette, then when you see one and it's backlit and it's far away, you're better able to tell what it is. I should do a talk about birds and have them all just in silhouette maybe. So shape, we know turkey vultures are more dark brown, black vultures are more black. We've got the field marks, the pale tips of the black vulture wings, and the head of black vulture is black compared to turkey vulture is kind of reddish. All that can be hard to see at a distance. For colors, the flight feathers, which are in birds, flight feathers refer to the primaries, the outer feathers in the wing, the secondaries, inner ones, and then the retrices, or the tail feathers. But those are pale colored. But so you might key into those when you're looking at the vultures, and we talked about behaviors too. But there's another thing to think about, which is the structure. And if you look at these two, one obviously has longer legs and a longer tail. Black vulture's feet reach the tip of their tail. Turkey vulture's feet don't come anywhere close. Turkey vulture has longer, narrower wings. There are behavioral, there are structural, and there are appearance differences in these two species. So we've been looking at great blue herons or herons and sandhill cranes a lot today. They're both, as far as structure, they're tall birds with long legs and a long neck, but they're clearly not the same shape once you start looking more closely. And for the sake of time, I'm just going to kind of go over it myself, but try to think to yourself what the differences are. The two main things most people notice is the neck of the great blue heron is longer and thinner, and the back side of these two birds, the back of the sandhill crane, to use a technical term, it poofs out. And the back of the great blue heron is kind of pointed. So this is the tail right down here in the wingtips. On the sandhill crane, these are the secondary feathers, the inner flight feathers I mentioned earlier, and they fold up and kind of poof out, make a little bustle that covers up the tail. So on all cranes, the wing feathers cover the tail. You can't really see the tail. And this, just this little poofed out feather is, you can see that probably a mile away on a crane. So if it's just one, it's not two next to each other, it's not digging in the ground with its beak, you can still probably tell. And you can, and the neck shape is fairly different. But this is harder to see, the neck shape sometimes at a distance. This poofy thing in the back is really pretty obvious. All right, and of course, a bird's behavior influences its shape. This is kind of a sleek down, alert catbird. It's got its feathers all sleek down. This is as skinny as they're gonna look. And I don't remember if this is the same bird or not, but that bird looks like it weighs twice as much as this bird. No, it's not, it was a different time of year. It could have been the same bird though. It's not that it just ate a whole bunch of suet or grape jelly or something like that. It's just, I think it's a little chilly outside. It looks like winter light, maybe if I'm remembering correctly, and it's got its feathers fluffed up so it stays warmer. So you might say, oh, catbirds, yeah, they're always really long, skinny if you just saw that. Or if you just saw this one, you go, oh, catbirds, boy, they got this huge beer belly and tail's not that long either. That's because this one's foreshortened, it's facing away. So you want to watch birds for a while. Think about, even if you don't see the behavior of fluffing out the feathers or somehow changing the structure as their mood changes, think about how that could happen. And something like this, they don't stay like that for that long. They're just trying to get warm. All right, beaks or bills. White ibis is classic. It helps to try to explain it. This is a good one to explain. It's long, really long. It's also pretty thin, but it's thicker at the base, and it's not recurved. Recurved means it goes up. It's decurved, or you could just say curved down. So long, thin beak that's curved down. It's pink, and it's full of dirt. It's a hint to how they feed. Also, they probe their beaks in the ground. All right, this is the classic bill comparison. You've got anhinga on the top and cormorant on the bottom. Anhinga starts with the letter A. A is pointed. It also stands for the word acute. Cormorant starts with the letter C. C, the word curved, also starts with the letter C. And the shape of a C is like the shape of a cormorant's bill. Boy, there's so many different clues there for these two bills. And this is visible at a long distance. More subtle, but still visible at a long distance is things like difference in bill length. Snowy egret in the front and the tricolored here in the back have pretty similar shaped bills, but the longest snowy egret bill, even when it's its longest record recorded one, doesn't get as long as the shortest little blue heron. And in general, little blue heron bills are a lot longer. You can almost always tell just looking at them in silhouette from a long ways away, this longer billed little blue heron. And you think, well, these are white and those are dark. Well, if the lighting's really bad, imagine the birds flying by and you're looking up in the sunlight, you can't tell that white birds are actually white in really bad lighting. That's why, and this is just also a good exercise to practice looking at bills. And the last clue is colors and patterns. Two birds that are the same size and shape and similar behaviors, similar distribution. You could see a red-bellied woodpecker or a red-headed woodpecker on a telephone pole. Then you want to look at something like patterns, and patterns are better than colors. Let me see. So the most obvious pattern, you think, the other thing that in addition to looking at colors first is people look at the brighter color. So when people are looking at these, the natural tendency is to look, okay, it's got a red head and it's got a red head, but it's not so red. But at a distance, red disappears pretty quickly, especially in the shadows. If it's far away and you've got a bright light shining on it, you can see red from pretty far. But if you're in the shadow or something's backlit, you won't be able to see that red. But what you will see are whites and blacks, or at least big white patches. So this black back with this big white patch on a red-headed woodpecker is visible at a super, super long distances and when they're flying. And that's really the best mark for a red-headed woodpecker, not the red head. The red-bellied woodpecker, on the other hand, has got the zebra stripe on its back. And that's a good pattern for these guys. This one, you can't even see a red belly. Oh, did somebody just put a chat thing in here? Oh, did I say try hard? Oh, did I say little blue in the last slide?
No, someone was just asking, oh, there we go, yeah.
Okay, yeah, if I every once in a while I do say the wrong name for a bird and that gets me in trouble. But yeah, it was a tricolored heron and a snowy egret in that last slide. If I said the wrong thing, yes. Thank you, whoever did that, I probably did. Okay, this is definitely a red-headed woodpecker and a red-bellied woodpecker. And the patterns, the point of this slide is that white on the red-headed woodpecker is visible at a long distance, and looking at this zebra pattern in the back is good, better than looking at the red on the head on these woodpeckers. All right, let's see here. Male and female birds are often different colors, but they're almost always the same shape. So if you see a bird like a female cardinal and it's pretty drab colored, you might want to think, well, is there a more brightly colored one nearby like the male? And that could help you if you're trying to identify a bird where the colors are not so bright. And very, very few birds is there a significant difference in shape in between male and female of birds in Alachua County. One example would be the boat-tailed grackle. The females are a lot smaller and they don't have the big boat tail. And they're different colors too, but the shape is different in boat-tailed grackles. Speaking of the boat-tailed grackle, this slide illustrates the how lighting can affect color on a bird. The bird on the left is in direct light. It can look purple, or in this case, kind of bluish, but the bird on the right has got light behind it and it looks or mostly black or black with a little bit of purple in it. So all blue colors in birds are structural. That means it's based on it's more like a prism, sort of the way they're reflecting light, the feathers. And so they can be a lot harder to see in bad light situations. And so another thing about patterns on a bird is learning some of the terminology. This slide, I know it's crammed full of text here. This is just to illustrate that in every good field guide at the beginning, usually there's a little section called bird topography. And it goes through what they call in that book, the different parts of a bird. And it varies book to book. That's not standardized, although most things are pretty typical, like median crown stripe. It makes sense. It's a stripe down the middle of the top of the bird's head. Some of these other things like post-ocular, you don't hear that used so much. You might just hear eye line, but if a bird doesn't have dark lores, then the eye line's only coming behind the line. You could call it a post-ocular if you want to be fancy. The lores are one of the most important things to look at on a bird because it changes its whole personality. A bird with dark lores might look intelligent or concerned or maybe even mean, some people might say. And I think it's mean to say that, but it might, if that helps you remember it, that's okay. A bird with pale lores will look, I think, innocent or cute, or some people say stupid, which I think is also mean, but if that helps you remember it, that's fine. But just think about a bird's facial expression. These are things that you do subconsciously. Like, why does that bird look like it's mad? Or why does that bird look so cute? It could be because it has pale lores. It's something to kind of look at. Just a couple other quick things. I'm not going to go through all of these. These three lines here, the dark one here, the light one here, and the dark one, depending on what book you use, they'll use different terminology for these. And this terminology is used by David Sibley and Ken Kaufman in their books. And so I like it also, it makes sense. The mustache stripe, sometimes some books might even call that the malar stripe, but it's, this is a group of feathers here, which is the malar area, also sometimes called the submustachial stripe. And then the stripe on either side of the throat is the lateral throat stripe. But just encourage you to look at that section of your field guide and then also to look at birds. And this is sort of, I'm mostly talking about birds you, for the most part, will see in your yard or in a nearby park. But try to see these features on a bird. A median crown stripe, does a cardinal have one? Well, not really, it's all red. But what about a chipping sparrow? Oh, maybe, let's see. Maybe it's just in the front, but not in the back. What about lateral crown stripe? So once it's sort of another thing about human memory. Once you've got, know the name of something, it's easier to remember it. And it's not just the name of the bird in general, but the name of a part of a bird. And a really good way to do this is, a lot of people think they can't draw, but everybody can draw a circle and a triangle. And this is just in a line. And this is just a bunch of circles and triangles in line. This is no specific bird. This is just drawing all those things in the previous slide, and just showing that you can do a sketch of a bird. It can be pretty horrible like this, but you can draw in these different field marks. And drawing is a great way to embed these things in your mind more. It's also kind of fun. When was the last time anybody drew anything? Like 20 years ago, or when digital cameras came out? Now with digital cameras, it's so cheap and easy. Everybody is just taking pictures, but so drawing's a bit of a lost art, but it's really important to learn shapes. And again, if you just look at the topography part of your book and then go out, sit in your porch in your yard, and then look at the birds that are coming to the feeder, and try to look at different names for parts of birds and try to find those parts on the birds in your yard. That's a great exercise. It's a fun thing to do. For example, how about this blue jay? What color is the crown of the blue jay? I don't have time to go into all this stuff now, but top of the head is light blue. The lores are dark. It's got a white eyebrow or supercilium. The key thing on a lot of birds, or a fun thing to look for, is where's the white? And especially things like ducks or birds that you might be seeing in the distance, but even things that might be right up close at your feeder. You know, look at the pattern of where the white is, because those are often some of the more obvious colors that stand out. Bare parts are also good things to look for, and it's useful when you're looking at birds coming to your feeders, because you can get really close views like this mourning dove. You can see bare parts are parts that aren't covered with feathers, including the beak and the legs, the feet, stuff like that. Usually most birds. So the ring around the eye in the mourning doves is pale blue. You've got this gape, the fleshy gape, the baby lips that are kind of pinkish, and then a black beak. It can be really hard to see bare parts on birds just because it's a finer detail. But if you practice looking at bare parts on birds in your yard, I think you'll be able to see them better when you're out in the field birding. And finally, I just want to end with this, that we're, the sort of the push is to see new species of birds, but you can also improve your bird identification skills and learn more about birds. It's really rewarding to look at individual birds, and it's really not that hard to identify a lot of birds to individuals. And this is something that if you're frustrated because you can't travel and do your trip to Southeast Arizona or Costa Rica or wherever to go birding, well, try to look at the birds in your yard in a whole new, imagine you're taking a trip to your yard. Instead of seeing new species, you want to identify individuals. There's pretty good evidence that downy woodpeckers can be identified just based on their head patterns. And here's one downy woodpecker that was taken in March and another one taken in August. Do you think this is the same bird or different birds? I think they are different birds, because these patterns also hold pretty consistent throughout molt. So every year birds change their feathers. I didn't get into molt at all in this talk, didn't really have time, but they get a new set of feathers, and when the old ones get worn out every year. But these patterns will hold pretty consistent usually. And this bird's got thick dark line on either side. This one it's kind of weird shape here, and then this weird little thin V on the left side. And it's some of these things that you need to kind of get a photograph to really see them well. But once you've seen it and started to look at details like this, it becomes pretty obvious. Now this little V on the left side bird, we can see that bird in our yard, and you can see that really quickly. And if you can find details like that on birds in your yard, when you take your trip to Costa Rica or wherever, you're looking at some weird tropical bird, well, you'll notice these little details on it a lot better than you would if you just thought downy woodpecker, oh, that's cute, and oh, it's eating the suet, and glad we got the suet, and what just looking at some other more broad brush things. But if you really key into these little details, it helps you become more observant. And on that note, as long as you guys want, Tim or Audubon, I'm well. Okay, we've got some. I have some time for questions. Thank you all for tuning in. And I might be able to see him in the chat too. Okay, someone said, how do you ID skittish ducks in the lake at night? Good question. Yeah. So can you find them in the daytime? The question is, how do you ID skittish ducks on a lake at night? Yeah, so just like, I guess I didn't mention this in this talk, but I mean, I misidentify things all the time. And the key is you keep on trying and getting better. So sometimes the bird just flies away and you're never going to see it again. So you don't know what the correct answer was. If there's any way to get better looks at these, obviously that would help. They leave at dawn. They're only there at night, a whole flock of them. That's kind of tricky. There's the shape. If you can see a silhouette of them, a lot of ducks have distinctive head shapes, like that brand, which I'm blanking on the name. There's one duck redhead that I forget. There's a brand of clothing that has a head of a mallard on it, and even if it doesn't have any weird bumps like a ringneck duck on the head, the head shape of most ducks is fairly distinctive. They may, the time of year, you can narrow it down. There aren't that many ducks in big flocks right now. It's blue-winged teal is probably the most likely. If it's not loud, if it's loud, it would be black-bellied whistling ducks, but you would probably know that. So, and the ringneck ducks are coming in now, but ducks usually arrive in Central Florida a little bit later. Okay, birds that stick to reeds like marsh wrens, they come out, but only half a second. Sound is definitely the best method. Marsh wrens have a distinctive little call note, and the trick with a lot of these things, and I don't have a good ear for music, and if anyone's ever heard me sing, they'd say, well, that's an understatement. But you can train your ear to hear these sounds, and to me, and also listening to tapes, online resources. The Macaulay Library from Cornell is good. Then there's a website called Xenocanto, Xenocanto, which has lots of sounds on there. Both of those are reviewed, so the sounds are accurate for the most part on there. So listening to sounds online, marsh wren will do a single or a double chet chet or chut chut note in the wintertime. They start to sing, actually they sing a little bit in the winter, but they start to sing in the spring. But if you're walking around a marshy area with thick reeds and you hear these little call notes, that's the best way to tell a marsh wren. Sedge wrens, on the other hand, sound to me like electricity going through a transmission line or something, static electricity. It's a pretty different sound. And they do, it doesn't sound as much like grunting to me, but one of the tricky things about sound is people hear things differently. One of the things that I hear doing these grunting noises more is swamp sparrows. Most birds will make a variety of sounds. They've got their songs and they have 2 or 3 or more different calls. And the swamp sparrows do this sharp chip, which is like sort of like an eastern phoebe. And they also do like a high-pitched rising kind of a contact note. And then they've got this little aggressive note when they're chasing each other around. And that's, to me, that sounds like a grunting noise more. Sedge wrens also do a little grunt note. And I don't hear that as much from marsh wrens, but I would probably do that a little bit too, I'd guess. Any other questions? Yeah, thank you, Grayson. Thank you, Lisa. Oh, good. Tim sent a link to eBird.
I was going to say that one is great because it'll like, you can, since you can search for the, users uploaded media, you can basically find what certain birds sound like in your area at that time of year, which is helpful for us because like, I was like one time I was like trying to find out like what a whippoorwill sounds like in Florida locally, because since they don't sing as much, and I was able to find this several different types of sounds that they make, like the quips and things like that.
Oh, and I did notice that someone pointed this out. The grunting was for ducks, not the wrens. Yeah, so if you look on eBird, then you narrow it down to the ducks that you might have in big numbers in Alachua County at this time of year, which aren't that many. And then you would go through and go to this the link that Tim sent, and you type in the name of the bird, and you go through and click on the different sounds they make, and you could probably hear it. Grunting, I'm not sure what that would be. Yeah, that was, who was that? That was great. That was Grayson. Yeah, thanks. Yeah.
Another question from Mark is, he says, at Sweetwater, I saw a wading bird with full green feet and long, wide toes, white undertail and sidebars, bill rounded, but length of duck's bill. Couldn't idea it. Any clues?
It can be hard from the description. It was size. Let me see if I got this. Size of a duck, white under the tail, shorter bill. It sound in long toes. If it had long toes without lobes on them, that would be a common gallinule. And oh yeah, so this is what's going on now. There are young common gallinules. Also, previously was called the common moorhen, and the adults look different. They've got the bright red bill, which is sort of the first thing that's easy to key into, and that's distinctive. But if it's a younger bird, the bill can be blackish, and so it's probably a young common gallinule. That's kind of that would be my first guess. I mean, it could be a rail or something like that. I might have missed something. Maybe that could have referred to a coot too. But my guess is if it's kind of a weird looking bird with those really long toes, walking around out in the open, that's probably a young common gallinule.
What about a purple gallinule?
Yeah, it could be a young purple gallinule too. Also, they're a little more colorful and a little less common, but it definitely could be that also.
Thank you. Marilyn asks, how do you tell the difference between house finches and purple finches?
Yeah, that's a good one to look at now, because it's an invasion year for finches, and every several years when it has to do with the different food crops up north, that they're called eruptions, where seed-eating birds will come farther south, and this is a good year for finches erupting. Tim has already seen a pine siskin in Gainesville, and hopefully we'll have some purple finches also. And so their bill, there's a lot of subtle differences. The female purple finch facial pattern is more distinctive. It's sort of hard to just describe, I think. I would say the best thing is to go into eBird image search and look for purple finches and house finches, and look at the females and the males. The females' head pattern is more distinctive. The bill shape is a little bit different, and they do a little bit different call, but the color can be a little different. They're very similar though, and they can be kind of tricky. I'd say almost one of the things that stands out most is on a female, though, the white eyebrow, the facial pattern is much more distinctive. But it's a lot of very subtle things that are hard to describe. So I'd say you're better off just having the two of them side by side from a reputable source, and scrolling through and then trying to describe out loud what differences you see. They're also both very variable. The house finches are even more variable. They can be orangey and brown and red and all kinds of different things. And purple finches are a little bit more purplish color usually, the males. Yeah. Sorry, that's not a satisfactory answer for me either, but it's a little bit tricky one to explain, I think.
Ben had a question too. He says, do you think there's a chance any red-breasted nuthatches might show up in the county this winter?
Yeah, I do. It's supposed to be an eruption year for those too. And they eat suet and peanuts, peanut butter, things like that. I don't know. Most of the records of ones in the county, as far as I can remember, weren't coming to feeders, but they could. honestly, for something like that, the best way, if you have not seen one and you want to go find it, is to look on eBird and see if any have been seen, and then go to that place and try to find it, because they're never common. The nuthatches are really distinctive. They're very small, and the brown-headed nuthatches in Alachua County don't range into suburban areas. In some other places, more at the heart of their range, if you're in Georgia or South Carolina or something like that, you might see brown-headed nuthatches in neighborhoods. But in Florida, they're in pretty natural areas. In Alachua County, it's mostly Morningside or Longleaf Flatwoods. But the red-breasted nuthatches, on the other hand, when they have these eruption years, they show up anywhere, and it's often in a neighborhood or a park. But because you can't predict where they're going to be, the best bet really is look at something like eBird or sign up for the Alachua County Rare Bird Alert on WhatsApp, however you do that. Tim, I forget who runs. Peter Polshek runs that one. But if you get on that, and maybe Tim, you can explain how to do that. But if somebody sees a red-breasted nuthatch and they report it, then you get an announcement about it. But you also wouldn't see a white-breasted nuthatch in Gainesville because they don't occur here anymore.
Any other questions?
No, not quite really, but at some point we should. Yeah. All right. Well, thank you all. Lots of great questions, and I really had fun doing this. I'm glad you could tune in. I think Tim said it's going to be posted somewhere, the link to it on Alachua Audubon or something.
Yep.
So, yeah, if anyone has any questions, you can contact Alachua Audubon and they can get me in touch with you. But thanks for tuning in.
Yeah, thanks so much, everyone.